And welcome back to my boat build video 6. What we're looking at here is my boat build station, and that is the successful, I think, knock on wood here, first frame that I built and glued up the other day. So a couple things to note. I haven't yet put it on the tools used list, but I use a drill with a pilot bit to set my screw holes. And then I use an impact driver with, I'm using a square bit here. I'm using the number 10 3-inch stainless steel deck screws. These are what were available at Menards. I didn't, it's all fresh water for me, stored on a trailer, so I'm not worried about anything other than stainless steel beneath the fiberglass. Speaking of the fiberglass and how I did this, you'll see that I drove the screws, I did a little bit of filleting, I used silica as my filler in my epoxy here. I think I'm going to get away from that. I'm going to do some experiments with some wood flour and sawdust materials to see if that works a little better. The other thing I've noticed, again, this is August 2016, and it's really warm and humid here. It's about 90 degrees with 98% humidity. We've had intermittent thunderstorms. So humidity, while I'm not worried about it with cure time, because I just glue this up and leave it overnight, no problem, but it looks like the transom piece here, I believe that's what it's called, the side piece, the side of the hull, looks like it cured at a little bit of an angle that is slightly different from this one. Amateur boat building. So here's the tip. Next time I am just going to put a piece of 2x4 scrap here and then clamp this down, same on the other side, and that way they'll cure up, and hopefully I'll keep it a little truer during cure up phase. The other thing, I want to take you over to my workbench. I have been experimenting with epoxies and fillers. So, like Mark used, I tried the PL3. My brother-in-law Casey is also building a Spira boat out in Oregon, and he experimented with that. He went with West Systems, and both he and I agree that there are plenty of other products on the market. I tried some Bondo. I've got a little micarta knife handle experiment going on as well. But we kind of feel like these boats are going to carry our family out on the water. So why mess with subpar materials? Yeah, they're more expensive, but both he and I decided to stick with the West system. I have past experience with it, and he's a couple months ahead of me on his build, and he's been getting great results. So, I'm experimenting with a couple different things here. First of all, this is 2 pieces of fur, just epoxied together. And there was a big split in one of these. This is just from the scrap pile, and I filled it with epoxy. And my plan is, first of all, to experiment with some sanding of this. I'm not sure the camera's picking it up, but I want to experiment with smoothing it, fairing it, sanding it, and get some experience on the scrap piece before I go to the actual hull. But when I'm done experimenting with the sanding and finishing, I intend on cutting this with a saw, a miter saw probably, and double checking the fills before I start fillets and fairing and actually putting together the boat. So I'm experimenting with that. And then on this piece here, you can see, and I left this exposed deliberately so I could see it as well, depending on how it cured up, I'm experimenting with fiberglass cloth. This is just a piece of 2x4 here in Wisconsin. We call this pine. Sometimes they call it yellow pine or white pine. On the coast they call this fir, so I'm not sure which exact species it is, but it's just our common softwood that you pick up at Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's, just construction 2x4s basically. I use slightly higher grade. I think they normally have 3 different grades at the stores. I use the mid grade. Well, it's a boat. I want decent lumber. I don't want to overpay for it. It's not going to be pretty and exposed, but I certainly don't want crappy lumber that might split, crack, or disintegrate on me. Anyhow, on this, I'm experimenting with the fiberglass cloth. So The last time I did something like this 20 years ago, it took 2 or 3 coats of the West Systems epoxy to really get it transparent so you didn't see the cloth. And I haven't worked with this particular type of cloth before, and I don't know if West Systems has altered their formula, although the number designations are the same for the past 20 years. So I figured, again, early in the process, I'm going to run this experiment. I have ample time. I'm not rushing. So I'm playing a little bit with that, and stand by. At the end of this video, I'll probably do all these separate experiments together now. Some sanding, some touch-ups, some second coats. Probably switching over the entire work surface over there to build the second frame, and then I might just come back at the end of my time in the workshop tonight and show any differentiation or things I found after I clean up this first series of experiments and frame build. So see you in a bit. Thanks for sticking with me, and for all those who have emailed, including Jeff Spira, thank you for checking in. Let me know anything you're wondering about or would like to see specifically. I am happy to take requests and make this even more useful for you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Hi there. So this is episode 6. Let's call this part B of the video. Just a couple quick shop tips and a pause before I get to the next steps I'm about to accomplish here. First of all, clamps. All sorts of clamps in the shop. Use them all the time for everything. Drives me nuts when these little things come off. I am now disciplining myself. Every time one of those things comes off, grab whatever adhesive is nearby. Here I've got some Loctite spray adhesive. I am going to glue that on before I do anything else. Secondly, I did not show my actual experiments being laid up, and I'm just showing you the interim stage here. However, this epoxy, as good as it is still pretty noxious. As I get older, use more and more safety equipment. I don't want this to be a crazy shop safety video, but I use a full respirator, not just a simple mask, when I'm working with epoxies and really fine sawdust, like I'm about to experience. The epoxy vapors are pretty noxious. The epoxy shavings and sandings are super toxic as well. I'm about to hit this with a rigid bench sander, belt sander, and I'm using 80 grit as an experiment to begin with. This thing's going to kick up a lot of dust. You can darn well rest assured when I turn this camera off, I'm putting that respirator on before I touch anything with that sander. And then the last shop safety lecture for the day, I'm about to take that piece of my Carta and trim it up, and this will be my first time using the shop saw in these videos. Excuse me, my table saw. This is just a little contractor's table saw I have right here. I have not built the workstation. I have not moved everything in the shop here. It doesn't matter. Full safety. The riving knife is set. Yes, I took the guard off because this is odd-shaped fiberglass coming out of the jig, so it won't go through normally, but you can see the push stick is right there, ready to go. Mine is a Miles Craft push stick, even homemade versions. Keep your fingers away from that thing. I can't yet afford a SawStop table saw, but God, would I love to upgrade to one. SawStop, if you want to sponsor my boat building videos, please drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Anyhow, I will be back with you as soon as I get everything switched over and these things chopped up to show you the results. Alright, call this video 6 part 3. So, I did in fact use the table saw to cut the micarta experiment, and I said it was going to give off a lot of dust. This is ridiculous. This would be horribly noxious if you breathed it in. That's pretty much straight fiberglass, epoxy resin, and it's super, super fine. So I'm going to hit that with my shop vac before I leave here tonight. Sawdust I can sometimes be sloppy with, but that's not cool. And that's exactly the sort of thing I bought a Dust Deputy for. This was a great $100 buy. Intercepting all the fine sawdust and dust materials before it hits the shop vac filter. Really, for sort of cheapo dust collection purposes, love it. I'd love to afford a $600 big system, but until I get this place built out, and until I get paid on a couple projects, That's the poor man's way of going about it. So here are the results of the initial sanding on my fiberglass experiments, my epoxy experiments. Again, I was using a rigid belt sander, 3 by 18 I believe, and I was using an 80 grit cloth. I think that was a little much. I think next time I do this, I'll probably do it with 120 to start. Again, this is the first layer of epoxy on this. So now that I've sanded this, I am going to experiment with a second layer. Here, after the initial sanding, the places where I put it on smoothly are a little low for my liking. So either I sanded too much or I need a thicker application. Also learning here, this joint, some of it absorbed more, some fell in more, so this will have to be faired out. So I'm going to have to plan for that on the joints, which you know intuitively, but now I really get a feel for it. It's not that bad. I'm actually quite pleased with it. So if you mix up a very thick batch of epoxy, more like a fillet batch to smooth that out in the fairing process, I'm fairly confident with that going forward. Again, I'm going to experiment with a couple of coats of this, and then I'll come back and saw this to check out the gap filling in the void. Here where the cloth was, I'm really pleased with this. I put on the epoxy on this piece for any number of reasons, like a 4-year-old in kindergarten going nuts with arts and crafts. This was not well put on. But again, same 80 grit belt sander, and where it was put on nicely, you cannot see the cloth underneath, and where it wasn't, I'm fairly confident with a second coat of epoxy, or maybe a third, and some more sanding, we'll get where we want on the transparency of the actual fabric cloth. So I'm pleased with that as well going forward. And then this is my first time making linen micarta for knife scales or other purposes, and it's a surprise gift for my wife, but if she watches these videos she'll find out before it's ready. But I went down to the Walmart and bought Hello Kitty trademark cloth. Big licensing on that, big merchandising. And I made up this micarta, and it cut very well on the table saw. It was experimenting going lengthwise. That didn't go well since none of this is squared up. I guess I could run it across a planer or a jointer, but I'm not getting that crazy. You see the pink, you see some of the Hello Kitty. I am going to experiment with this a little more. I left this overnight, the same as I left the boat building stuff, but because of the thickness in the layers and the fact that it was in an enclosed pressure jig with clamps, there's a little bit of tackiness. I feel like if I leave it overnight one more night, particularly now that I've sawed this side and exposed it, it'll be totally fine. But that's just nitpicking and a question of the weather these days. So anyhow, I am really pleased with my experiments. Shop safety, and thanks for joining me for what I think is video 6 of my series here. I'm pretty much going to call it a night. It's been a long week. I was planning on breaking down frame 1 and starting to lay out frame 2, but I think I'm going to leave that for when I'm fresh in the morning, and I am going to go make some pizza with the better half. So until next time, thanks again. Bye-bye.